Oi, oi, you filthy swines, get in here. Make sure you like the stream, if you like the stream, and subscribe to the stream if you really like the stream. And let's get on with stuff. I'm a believer in reasonable environmentalism. I think there's a lot to be said about looking after the environment and not getting too caught up in the likes of Greta Thunberg and whatever, because some of their highly politicized environmentalism isn't really helpful in the long run, because it actually casts a shadow on something which is really important, which is not being a filthy swine in a bad way. This article on the Daily Mail, written by somebody called Chris Mellor, who was the US Assistant Science Editor. Good for you, sir. Exclusive top MIT scientists blast climate hysteria, says global warming fears are driven by money, not evidence. And I would agree, but, I'm not exactly a climatologist, but I can see patterns. And one of the patterns that I see is a lot of these things are being used for political gain, which is a shame because it should be apolitical, but it's not. Anyway, let's read this, shall we? Skepticism about climate change has resurfaced, as some experts claim the exact cause of global warming remain unclear, and that the policies addressing it are motivated by money more than by science. I think it's interesting saying that skepticism has resurfaced. I think in the context of Daily Mail, it's resurfaced the fact that they are now permitted to entertain the possibility that some people are misusing people's fears about the climate for nefarious ends. Richard Lindzen, Professor Emeritus of Meteorology at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has spent decades studying atmospheric science. He told the Daily Mail that the public hysteria surrounding global warming isn't actually based on realistic data. Climate change is the term used to describe Earth's warming, mainly as a result of human activities such as burning coal, oil, and gas. I don't know, I've heard various figures for our contribution to climate change, and I'm not entirely convinced that we are as detrimental to the environment right now as we will be eventually if we keep going in this direction. So, yeah. Scientists and climate activists have warned that this extra warmth could cause more extreme storms, rising seas and flood cities, and hotter summers that make it harder to grow food worldwide. All within the next 25 years. Well, I don't know. Hot summers generally result in good crops, don't they? Frosts are most detrimental for growing crops usually. It's the lack of water, irrigation and such, is the issue there, not the heat. However, Lindzen said the financial implications of controlling the multi-trillion-dollar energy industry have been the true motivation for politicians to support flawed research that argues small temperature increases will lead to immediate disasters. The fact that you have a multi-trillion-dollar industry and you have an opportunity to completely overturn it had a great appeal to a lot of politicians, he explained. They go wild for it. Another half degree and we're doomed, and so on. The public knows this is nonsense. Lindzen explained the basic math behind what he called climate alarm. He said the emphasis on lowering specific emissions like carbon dioxide, CO2, simply doesn't produce the worldwide temperature changes advocates say it will. Scientists noted that the planet's temperature has fluctuated significantly throughout recorded history, and science still can't definitively prove what the exact cause of both extreme warming and cooling events has been. I imagine it's a whole bunch of different factors, so trying to fixate on carbon as being the only factor is kind of not really helpful. It's an easy thing for people to focus on, but does it really cause much? We don't understand the glaciation that occurred in the 15th century, so what's going on then? Inadequate CO2, Lindzen said, of the event in the northern hemisphere known as the Little Ice Age. Well, who knows, maybe the sun wasn't as active back then. According to the International Energy Agency, IAE, the global energy industry is currently worth between $6 trillion and $7 trillion, with over 80% of the energy being consumed worldwide still relying on fossil fuels. Despite clean energy alternatives making up only a small portion of the industry, IAE noted that governments and private companies invested a record $2.2 trillion into solar, wind, and electric initiatives this year. double the amount going into fossil fuels. In the US, policymakers have pushed billions into funding climate change projects, including the Biden administration setting aside $27 billion in a greenhouse gas reduction fund to finance clean energy projects and climate-related issues. Lindzen claimed that CO2 has been painted by lawmakers as one of the biggest climate villains that energy companies produce, but it's actually a minor greenhouse gas that is beneficial for plant growth. Well, exactly, yeah. And I heard actually that water is a much more potent greenhouse gas or store of heat. So if there's lots of humidity, I think that stores heat even better than CO2. The researchers contended that the worldwide trend for demonizing certain greenhouse gases gave many scientists a free pass to study and support climate change theories, resulting in large financial grants being awarded to their universities. In recent years, federal agencies in the US have been spending up to $5 billion annually on climate research, with the White House's 2024 budget spending $1.6 billion to universities and non-government organizations, NGOs, for climate change studies focused on the imminent natural disasters global warming could cause. Additionally, Lindzen has repeatedly claimed, including on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, that scientists who challenged the inconsistent data on climate change have often had their research rejected by academic peers, or the editors that published their findings were later fired. Doesn't really sound like science then, does it? COP29, shame, climate activists protest COP29 conference. It's a bloody video. I think we might watch this. Should we watch this? Brace yourselves, we're going to watch this video. And you might like it, you might not. We'll see.
Shame, all the crimes in your name.
They're certainly well-meaning. They seem like nice people, but also very annoying. I think it's hopeful that people are beginning to at least question this. It's an anomaly historically, and it'll be an embarrassment to our era, Lindzen said, of climate change's legacy. Judith Curry, former chair of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Tech, was another scientist who claimed that studies finding flaws in climate change models were filtered and rejected by academic papers. In 2011, she alleged to the Daily Mail that one of her own study co-authors had cherry-picked results to emphasize a tiny rise in global temperatures decades ago, while hiding data that warming had stopped for at least 13 years, starting in the late 1990s. Published studies have warned that if governments worldwide fail to keep global average temperatures from rising by 2.7 Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels by 2050, it could trigger unstoppable melting of ice sheets, crop failures, and deadly heat waves. Well, isn't the extreme cold more dangerous than the extreme heat? And if there's more CO2 in the atmosphere, crops are going to grow a bit better, aren't they? None of this really makes much sense to me. Not that I would want the world to heat up and the ice caps to melt and all that, but doesn't it seem as if more viable land for crops is going to make the world a more viable place for people to live? Not that we should do that purposefully, but, the argument there doesn't seem to make sense for creating alarm. Despite the fear, Lindzen calculated that doubling CO2 in the air would only raise the world's temperatures by about half a degree on its own. However, many of the studies predicted a climate apocalypse also assume that every bit of warming automatically adds more water vapor to the atmosphere, which is a much stronger heat trapper than CO2. Yeah, exactly. If you've ever lived somewhere very dry, like California, it may be hot during the day, but if there's no clouds in the evening, it can get quite cold. So deserts, a bit of fire and ice there. Lindzen called this assumption wrong, noting that nature typically fights major planetary climate swings instead of making them worse. His theory, called the iris effect, suggests that when the tropics get too warm, powerful thunderstorms punch holes in the clouds, opening an iris that lets extra heat escape into space. This directly counters water vapor's heat-trapping power by reducing the blanket of moisture-rich clouds that would otherwise trap more warmth. Lindsay added that even if every country hit international agreements for net zero emissions by 2050, meaning no more CO2 from fuel, would only prevent a tiny fraction of a degree of warming. The global financial costs of complying with strict environmental regulations, however, could run into hundreds of trillions of dollars, Lindsay warned, calling it a terrible trade-off for almost no gain. Meanwhile, today's CO2 levels help plants grow and need less water, making more food possible for billions of people. Exactly, that's kind of what I was saying before. I think we're low in CO2. In the geological sense, it's much too low. Even the increase in CO2 we've seen so far has probably increased arable land by 30 to 40%, Lindsay argued. We're not causing the imminent crisis that we think we are, he claimed. Other experts, including Bill Gates, are we claiming Bill Gates is an expert on the climate? Maybe he is, I don't know. And environmental think tank leaders have also questioned some climate alarm assumptions. Despite having reportedly spent roughly $2 billion on climate change initiatives over the last decade, the Microsoft founder has reversed course and said world leaders should focus on the global threats such as nuclear war. I don't know if nuclear war is such a threat, but whatever. Another former climate activist, Ted Nordhaus, also spoke out against what he called the shifting bar of climate alarmism. The writer and co-founder of the Breakthrough Institute, a non-profit environmental think tank, revealed that old models predicting global warming disasters this century were often based on the planet warming by roughly 9 degrees Fahrenheit by 2100. And those estimates no longer seem realistic, largely because of countries adopting cleaner energy policies over time. Climate scientists began to warn that only 5 degrees F of warming could cause the same catastrophes. The amount of warming that is conceivable, even in plausible worst-case scenarios, is not remotely consistent with the sorts of catastrophic outcomes that I once believed in, Nordhaus wrote in the Free Press in October. See if anyone said anything coherent down here. Where are the comments? Here they are. By House Sign Comic in Toronto, Canada. Tell me something I didn't already know. The WEF gang are to blame and are peddling hardware to mitigate the crisis. Mark Carney is a leading proponent of his net zero nonsense, as if we humans can affect whatever the Earth wants to do, blah, blah, blah. I'm not a believer in all this, neither am I. But the danger is devaluing the importance of looking after the environment. And if we take simply being good stewards of this planet as the goal and looking after life and whatnot, I think it's a bloody good goal to aim for. Instead of focusing on obscure abstract things like carbon dioxide, I keep reading more and more about how we are at a record low CO2 in the atmosphere compared to other geological periods of time. So is that not a concern? Is there not a danger that an absence of CO2 in the atmosphere might lead to other problems? Because if we're so obsessive about removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, if we keep going down this road as some kind of crusade, then I worry that we're going to encourage the opposite of global warming. We're going to find ourselves in a bit of an ice age, a man-made ice age. But I'm not an expert, but knowing what went on during all those years where tobacco companies were paying for research into the positive benefits of tobacco and all these other companies that were hawking wares that are dangerous for our health, doing similar studies. There's precedent out there for science, air quotes science, but it's clearly possible. It's been done before in the past. So I don't know why we have to assume that everybody who is purportedly a scientist and saying scientisty things and platformed on TV is suddenly some kind of gospel truth giver. I'm a bit more skeptical myself. That's just the way that goes. But that is it for now. Make sure you like the stream, share the stream, wave at the stream, say kind words to the stream, tell your family about the stream, and what else do I have to say? There's nothing to say, except Pigwig out.
Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oink, oink, wee, squeal, snort, snort, oinkity, squee. Oink, 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 squee, squee, wee, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 wee, 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 oh. Snort, snuffle, oink, squee, squeal, wee, snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, wee, squee, snort, oink, squeal. oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, squeeze, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, wee, snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinkity, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 wee, squeal, squeal. Snort, snuffle, oink, squeal, snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, 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 snuffle, squeeze, snort, oink, squeal, oink, oink, oinkity, squee, snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 squeal, squeal, snort, snuffle, oink.